Right now is Senate Finance Committee member Senator James Lankford and fellow Senate Finance Committee member Senator Maggie Hassan. Great to see you both. Thanks so much for joining us.
I'm glad to be here.
And you are a no vote.
I am.
Tell me why.
Because it includes the debt ceiling. The debt ceiling historically has been the moment when Congress has to pause and to be able to look at debt. We're the only country in the world that has a debt ceiling vote at all. And the reason we do that is it gives us one moment to look at our trajectory and to be able to decide, is this the right trajectory? If it's not, we need to correct it. This time, the debt ceiling is just being included into the budget agreement, and we're not doing anything on debt and deficit. I think we need to at least address it. I'm not looking for some kind of shutdown. I'm not looking for cliffs. Just what is the moment that we're going to actually look at debt and deficit and the trajectory, and that moment's now gone.
What do you think, Senator?
Well, I think it's really important that the president and congressional leaders were able to get to an agreement which makes a shutdown much less likely. And I think the kind of instability and crisis budgeting that would lead to is a real problem. I do think there are steps we need to be taking to make sure that we are budgeting responsibly. It's something that Senator Lankford and I have been working on together. I am pleased that just last week we took a major step in the Finance Committee in a bipartisan vote to lower prescription drug prices, which should save the American taxpayers about $100 billion over the next 10 years. That's the type of work we can do across party lines to make a real difference and begin to bring our spending down.
But you will vote for this budget deal?
Yeah, I think all in all, it's a good bipartisan deal. It allows us to address the priorities, invest in critical priorities to support small businesses and American families, and keep our country safe, secure, and free.
Why do we always get to the edge like this? I mean, we know that, one side wants to protect military spending more so than the other side, and it feels like one side holds the other hostage. You want military spending, then you're going to have to, follow the demands of discretionary spending and trillion-dollar deficits every year. Do they not matter?
Well, look, we know that we need to make sure that we are rooting out waste, fraud, and abuse in federal spending. But what I hear from constituents is they want us to be able to invest in critical priorities like fighting the opioid epidemic in my home state of New Hampshire, or like making sure that we have the funding to support our military to keep us safe and secure. That's important to everybody, all Americans. And James and I have been working together on a number of things, not just our bill to end government shutdowns, but also the taxpayer right to know law, which would make the government post what it's spending and what it's spending money on, so we can all see it and ask questions, right? We also have a customer service bill, and we also have a bill with Rand Paul that would really help us. It would require the government to identify duplication in any legislation.
I'm glad you mentioned the bipartisan work. The two of you working on this bipartisan Prevent Government Shutdowns Act, preventing future shutdowns, providing automatic funding. But how does that work in terms of busting the budget?
Well, it works towards forcing us to actually get to an agreement and to actually have real debate. Quite frankly, it's the same as when my mom, growing up, she would put my older brother and I in the room when we were having an argument and say, the two of you stay in this room until you work all this out. Right now, we're always getting to the end of September, and there's the big countdown clock to say we're going to get to a shutdown. Exactly. That shutdown, we lose money. Every time there's a shutdown, it's wasteful for the taxpayer. It's very difficult on federal families and all those federal workers that are out there, people that are trying to get permits, lose that. Right. So here's the main goal of it. You get to the end of the fiscal year. If we haven't gotten everything worked out on the budgeting area, you have what's called a continuing resolution. It freezes spending from the last year to this year, so it continues at the same level. But at the same time, members of Congress and our staff in the White House Office of Management and Budget cannot travel. We're in continuous session. Weekdays, weekends, we stay in session until we actually get it resolved. But the federal workers are held harmless in the process.
I think it's
a simple pressure point to say, get the work done, stay there until the work is done, and you can't leave until the work is done.
Very smart, actually. Let me turn to trade, because this is an issue that's important to the country, investors, USMCA, hanging in the balance. We had Senator Blackburn on earlier, Congressman Issa talking about whether or not we're going to see the bill come to the floor by September. I mean, when Congress comes back from recess, are you expecting it?
I'm hopeful that it has to come through the House of Representatives first. Constitutionally, it has a revenue measure in it, so it has to go through the House first. I have no doubt it will overwhelmingly overwhelmingly pass the Senate when it comes to the Senate, but the House has got to pick it up and be able to pass it. This is good for American farmers. It's good for American workers. It does settle a lot of the trade issues that's been in great dispute for years now. It settles these, and it, quite frankly, catches up on a lot of the issues with NAFTA. When NAFTA was passed, we didn't have an intranet at that point and all the e-commerce traffic that was happening. So it's very important for us to be able to resolve those issues
So
as well.
if it goes to the House, then gets to the Senate, are you going to vote for it?
So we just had a hearing on the USMCA in finance this week, and it has some very important good provisions, for instance, for New Hampshire dairy farmers. What's going to be critical is the enforcement provisions to make sure that American workers and our planet are protected and have access to a real enforcement mechanism, and that's something that we explored. So I'm hopeful about it. International trade done right is a really, really good thing for American business and American farmers. We just have to make sure that the enforcement provisions in there really protect those same people.
Is that it, or is there something else that you want changed?
I want to make sure the enforcement provisions are real.
So
but
that's your priority
also,
for USMCA.
I also want to hear what the working groups that the Speaker has put together in the House come out with in terms of their concerns or priorities or requested changes.
I mean, everyone I've spoken with, from union leaders to Congress, seems to believe that this is much better than NAFTA. Right. So is this playing politics that we're not getting this down to the House floor?
Well, we don't know what the holdup is on the House floor at this point. They've had the opportunity to be able to take it up now for months, and we'll see if they can actually get this worked out where they can actually bring it up. My belief is at some point that Nancy Pelosi is trying to be able to work with a very divided House, and she wants a majority of her Democratic group to be able to vote for it, and she's trying to be able to work through and see who has their questions answered and who's going to actually come on board with this, because we've been free traders longer than we've been a country. I mean, this was in the Declaration of Independence. One of our arguments with good King George is he was inhibiting our international trade. This is in the essence of who we are as Americans, as being open traders.
And real quick on the border, do you think Congress is going to be able to fix these loopholes? I mean, we had Mark Morgan on earlier from Customs and Border Patrol, and he said things are improving because of the deal with Mexico, because of the partnership with Guatemala. But long term, this is not a fix. We need those Flores agreements, the asylum standard, changed.
Yeah, we most definitely do. I was just down at the border last weekend. I would tell you there are critical issues there. Border Patrol is one of the critical issues. They're not designed to be able to house people. Border Patrol's like a police station where people get arrested, they get processed, then they get moved. They're asked to be able to be held there because of the funding of this whole defund ICE and the whole abolish ICE movement. We can't get additional funding for ICE. ICE is the entity that actually detains.
Well, AOC wants to do away with Department of Homeland Security.
Let's be clear. We need to have secure borders. We need to know who's coming into this country. We have an unprecedented drug epidemic in this country, and we still should be concerned about terrorism. So we absolutely need secure borders, but we also need to secure our borders in a way consistent with our values. We can do both. We've been presented with a lot of false choices. Either we do this or we do that. Let's secure our borders, but let's treat people humanely the way we have always stood for internationally throughout our history.
Can you get that done by the end of the year?
We are working on it. I've now been to the border twice. There is real interest in not only securing our borders, but we need comprehensive immigration reform.
I've been there too, and it's absolutely stunning. It's really a horror show. And the fact that all of these apprehensions have surged in the last year is pretty extraordinary. It
is very painful to be able to see, and it's an incentive for the cartels. As longer the Flores agreement sits out there and says, if you bring a child with you, you're going to get into America.
Right.
It incentivizes adults to bring a child with them.
The word is out in Central America.
Right. Well, and I think there are more factors than just that, and I think there are ways we can make sure that people show up for their hearings, and we can speed the hearings so that people who should be deported get deported faster without harming children. And that's what the United States can do.
You could get this done, Senators. It's great to see you both.
Great to see you.
Thanks very much for joining me this morning, Senators Hassan and Lankford.